Testing 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. Okay. I'm gonna put it right here. Oh. Yeah.
Put it right there.
Well, I need to aim it at your mouth for the best recording. So I can just hold it if you're okay with me kind of just leaning in like this a little bit. Is that uncomfortable for you?
It's annoying.
What if it was more like down like this? Is that so horrible?
It's fine.
I mean, I think this is the mic. No. Yeah, that's when you're talking.
It's got 4 mics on it.
It does.
The iPhone.
Oh.
3 or 4.
I have an older model than you, I think.
Okay.
I don't know. I'd have to
iPhone.
look it up.
I'm sure there's something you'll...
I don't know. I honestly don't know. So I asked you earlier if it would be okay, if it was okay if we could talk about the L train in context to, you're living out here in Bushwick and the neighborhood itself and what you've seen with the L train over the years in terms of, closures or repairs and things like that. And then we'll wrap it up with sort of how you think this current proposed 7-year length for repair would impact the neighborhood, both you personally and the community at large. Just a gut sort of hypothetical, right? Unless you have
Was that a question?
No, that was just me saying what we're going to talk about.
Right.
Those three
waiting.
those 3 areas.
All right.
So we're out in Bushwick. You've lived in Brooklyn for how long? Total?
24 years in Brooklyn.
24 years in Brooklyn, and you're from the area. You grew up in New Jersey, and you were coming to the city a lot as a youth and young adult.
I lived in the East Village before Brooklyn, and for on and off for about 5 years, and before that I was also living in Westchester and in New Jersey.
And in Brooklyn, it's been Park Slope, originally, and then Williamsburg, Greenpoint, Bushwick.
Never Greenpoint.
Oh, okay. I was thinking about that place over by the BQE.
That's not Greenpoint.
Wasn't sure. So Williamsburg, Bushwick, since 15. Well, no.
I don't know the exact dates. Late 90s, I moved to Williamsburg.
Like 20 years.
But I was already living in Williamsburg for a couple months here and there, on and off, in between other apartments in Park Slope.
And
I don't think all that's really important.
Oh well, it just gives context, like how the scope.
I was young. I was moving around a lot. I was living in a lot of different places. Surely you've done the same.
So you've seen a lot.
Yeah.
And you're very observant.
Is that a question?
I
guess so.
I guess
have my observations.
Well, yeah, right. I mean,
okay.
You're not oblivious to your environment.
No, thank you.
All right, that's what
I'm not.
I meant that as a compliment. So for the most of the time that you've lived in Brooklyn, you've been dependent on the L train. Is that would that be a correct question? Would that be a correct statement? I know.
Well, in Williamsburg and Bushwick, yes.
Last 20 years. let's say, has really been the L train has
Mostly,
been your main line into Manhattan.
Yeah.
And you said to me before that they've shut it down many times throughout the years, for long stretches to do repairs and do repairs and do repairs, even pre-Sandy.
Well, they didn't shut it down for weeks at a time, but they've been doing supposedly renovating the L train since the late 90s. I mean, it's been it's a constant kind of promise from the city that they're renovating it, yet it never seems to be renovated. Like 10 years ago they installed the LED system of telling you when the next how long the next train was going to arrive. But I mean, I remember being in Boston and them having the same system in the 80s. I mean, so they were already installing something that was 20 years old.
And you've mentioned,
and now that's going to be like, now they want to tear that out and put in another new system. I mean, I don't know all the details of what their plans are, but it just seems like a lot of Band-Aids.
has the service improved?
There's more trains, so I guess that would be yes. But for many years, they were kept closing off sections of the train. You have to switch to it. You get to Lorimer, and then you have to switch to a bus.
Ah.
That went on for many years. It just always seemed to be closing down, a portion of it. I mean, I guess that happened. I don't know. I guess that happens all over the city. I just am familiar with this train. But that said, I take all the trains in the city, and they don't seem to. I mean, when was the last time the NLR was shut down, other than for a
Sandy
emergency?
Sandy, it was shut down. Big chunks of it, the R were from Whitehall, just over to Brooklyn. That whole chunk was shut down, I think, for about a year while they did repair.
Mm.
But hurricane, not
Right.
upkeep. You live out in Brooklyn because
more square footage.
economics.
Okay, yeah.
Are there
More square footage for your rent. I mean.
Are there cultural reasons for living out here?
No, I mean, I always thought Brooklyn was quieter than the city, so I kind of like that.
Okay. And the
A
neighbors?
little more community oriented, although Bushwick isn't so community.
Where you're living, just because you've been here for like 15, 16 years.
15.
And you said it wasn't as populated back in the day, or was it populated differently in terms of a lot of these are converted industrial manufacturing into studio lofts.
I know.
What it was like when you got here.
Okay.
In terms of, how...
You're going to answer that?
No, you're going to
Okay.
answer it.
Keep chewing that. When I first moved out here, there were not many buildings were. I mean, there was half a dozen buildings that I was aware of that were, were artist lofts, and primarily industrial, and then a lot of. And that was really, I mean, substantial sized buildings, and there was already a grocery store. My landlord, that was the first thing he installed, was a grocery store, a 24-hour grocery store, because it was nothing out here, and that way he could justify, it was a block from the train station, and that way, he knew that people would come the extra distance and live in this industrial neighborhood if he had a grocery store here. So, and it was always a 24-hour grocery store. And it was primarily artists. I mean, I knew a lot of the first artists that moved out here. There were some McKibben lofts were always kind of like younger student kind of squatting type environment, very kind of more dormitory. It still is. My building was never that, and where the over on Bogart, those buildings were never like that. They were always kind of, they were artists and they were lofts, but they weren't like. Well, the landlords were a lot more present, and I think wouldn't really allow for that.
Other than the, so I'm assuming if there's only one grocery store there at that time, there weren't other small businesses either. What was the small business scene at that time?
Mix in June, which was this Japanese art couple that had a store in East Village called Auto Tootsie. I think it was called Auto Tootsie or Pluto, Tootsie Pluto, or I can't remember what it was. It was vintage clothing that they like repurposed and did stuff to. And that was that was in the 90s. Early 90s. They also lived in Williamsburg. But they had like a little store right next on Bogart. It was the first thing out here, and it was like this. You call it a store, but it was really kind of more their studio that opened to the street. They were really a very interesting couple, whom eventually got deported. Well, I think they moved to Oregon, and Mix got deported, I think, for not having a green card. At one point, I knew people who remained friends with them.
So their presence in the neighborhood was like their personality was a strong presence.
And it was all artists that had been pushed out of Williamsburg, and yet Williamsburg still wasn't built up yet, but it was just starting to it was becoming more popular, and rent was going up, and there was more of a party scene happening there, and as soon as the party scene started happening there, then that kind of always draws up the prices. There were more bars opening and nightclubs.
But this isn't even your longest commute into Brooklyn that you've ever had compared to other commutes, right?
Well, Park Slope was a little bit more.
And now, in your current home, you're also positioned close to the MJM.
I don't think it's very close. It's the furthest. I mean, if I'm dependent on solely that train and not the L anymore, that's the furthest I've ever had to walk every day for a train. I've always lived closer than that to a train.
And so if that did
it's a 10-minute walk.
If that were to become your reality as what's being discussed, what is that going to present for you in regards to how's that going to change how you currently live and travel in this city? And live, work, and travel, I should say, because I know a lot of your work takes you to Manhattan, right?
I mean, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I mean,
hypothetically,
I'll survive. I'll leave the house earlier. Might be forced to take a few more cabs. I don't know. I do what I have to do in order to get there. I'm not going to move because of it, because I don't want to have to move.
And that also brings up, so your building's in the process of having itself established under loft law. Can you tell me what you know about that subject?
Not much. Nobody seems to really have any definitive answers on that. I mean, just by supposedly registering, you're protected, even if you've never actually gotten the formalized papers of it. So, but protected is a relative term because, you know, rent does still go up. I'm not paying like, yes, it's below, what things rent for now, but with the L train going out, I'm sure that rents will go down out here, or they're not going to go up anyway. So, you know,
You're seeing the L train closure, and correct me if I'm wrong,
I mean, it really
as an
depends on what
impediment,
actually happens.
like how they accommodate, how they make up for it, I guess, or
Yeah.
it,
I mean, is it just going to be that there'll be a bus service to Bedford and then you take the train from Bedford into the city? Is it going to be? I mean, I don't really know. I don't think anybody really knows yet
well, they
what that
propose
is
that
exactly going
the
to be.
train goes into Bedford, it stops at Bedford,
Right. So,
so it still travels through Brooklyn, but doesn't make the connection to Manhattan. And I think the line in Manhattan may be closed because there's no point in having it open, just running
but they
from
just
8th Avenue
laid
to
all
14th
new
Street.
tracks like a couple years ago, like within the past 6 years, they were only running the train from in one direction through the tunnel to Manhattan, saying that they were laying new track in the tunnel. Now, this was probably before Sandy, but still, it's like, well, in this day and age, I just don't understand why all this takes so long when, you know, they built the frickin' trains 100 years ago in like, a fraction of the time. And yes, maybe they had like, a lot more labor, but surely the technology and the machinery and everything's a little bit more advanced now.
Well, you've traveled widely. You've used transportation systems in other major cities, Europe
Yes.
specifically, right? Where do you see New York ranking internationally in regards to public transit from your experience, the places that you've gone?
No, it's been a while. I don't know. I mean, the train system is pretty extensive and pretty easy to get around in, at least as far as Manhattan goes. And I mean, it's big. It's
Mm.
bigger than any other city, so, that I'm aware of.
Mm.
It's pretty easy.
Do you have if your opinion, your voice, uh, advocating for what you would like to see could actually be heard and seriously considered by the powers that be that make the decisions around the MTA and the L train, what would you want them to know? Like what perspective would you like them to have that you think would be, your experience with the transit system?
I don't have their solution. So, I mean,
Maybe more as a writer, what is one need? Is there one need that you could identify that if they could at least fulfill this one, need, then that would make the ride better. That would make commuting better, traveling better, experience better.
I don't know. I don't have. I think it's really specific. I just think that the more information they can give us and the more accurate it is, that's always nice.
Mm.
And I think that's part of the point is that they want to put in some systems into place, but why are we so late in coming to the game? I mean, we're one of the oldest, if not the oldest, railroad system or subway system in the world, and yet it's been so mismanaged. And I think that's really what it is, too, is that, clearly state is not doing its job at managing the MTA, and they should be. It's up to them to see that, you know, they're fulfilling their obligation to the city. I don't feel like, you know, it has been managed very well. Maybe that's changing. I don't know.
Any other thoughts on the subject? Any stories you want to tell?
No. In regards to the train system, no.
Or your experience in this neighborhood over the years?
Well, as much as I've lived in some rough neighborhoods and definitely participated in many neighborhoods that are in the city, this is still one of the more it's truly industrial. It can be desolate and it can be dangerous and it can be, you know, apocalyptic at times.
Because of its close proximity and juxtaposition with manufacturing.
And the projects. And the railroad.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
It's also where a lot of waste. I mean, you look at what the light industrial is out here. It's concrete, waste management and dispersal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like they dispersing. So it's like there's all these buildings out here that just house garbage. Huge facilities that they dump and then load up again and then truck out again.
Mm.
And then there's meat packing.
Next door.
Right next door. But I mean, there were years out here where I'd look out the window and like at least once or twice, like twice a year, there'd be like a car parked outside in the street in full flames, like completely on fire, like you're in Beirut.
Sorry. I remember my first flaming car. It was.
Oh, I've seen many.
It's
right
frightening.
there,
It's frightening.
right outside the window.
Look out your window and see that.
It can be kind of pretty. And keep waiting for the fire trucks to come and nobody comes. Because there's nobody out here.
Well, now you have a...
Now there is, but...
that police station is new? The one on the other side of Flushing? Or has that always been there and
I think
now...
that's always been there. It's not really a police station, though. I don't think you can walk into it. It's like a...
Transfer station, maybe?
Holding...
Oh, okay.
Depot or something.
Oh.
I don't know. I try not to
have anything to do with them.
Okay.
All right, you done? Thank you very much. I know you're recovering, but thank you for talking to me.